He left his wedding ring where no husband ever should, under my son's fiancé's pillow. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just stared at it. That tiny circle of gold, still warm, still smelling faintly of cedar wood and deceit. The kind of warmth that burns you long after you let go. People say betrayal feels like a stab, but it doesn't. It's quieter than that. It feels like standing in your own kitchen, surrounded by family portraits, and realizing every smile in them is a lie. I slipped the ring into my pocket, kissed my son goodnight, and promised myself one thing. If they were writing my story without my consent, I'd choose the ending. That night, I didn't sleep. I cleaned, rearranged, cooked breakfast for a home that was already collapsing. When Adrian, my husband, walked in, his tie was crooked, his voice sweet, his lies perfectly measured. I poured him coffee, stirred in sugar, and listened. Every word was evidence now. But when the knock came at the door the next morning, it wasn't him they came for. 2 officers, calm faces, cold eyes. "Mrs. Carter," one said, "we need to talk about your signature on the transfer papers." My signature. I stood there, barefoot, coffee cup trembling in my hand, realizing I hadn't just lost a husband, I might lose everything else too. By midnight, one of us would be in handcuffs. By sunrise, I'd understand that the ring under her pillow wasn't the start of betrayal. It was the warning shot before the truth exploded. Stay with me till the end. You'll taste how revenge can be sweet and still burn all the way down. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. For most of my life, mornings smelled like jasmine and coffee. Adrian loved routine. He said it made life predictable, controllable, safe. Every day began with the same playlist humming from the kitchen speaker, the same 2 mugs on the counter, the same man smiling like he had never told a lie. I believed him. For 27 years, I built a life around that belief. A white house with blue shutters, a son whose laughter filled every corner of it, a garden of roses that bloomed too early and wilted too soon, just like everything he touched. Our son, Noah, was getting married in 4 months. His fiancée, Claire, had a voice soft enough to calm storms. She called me Mom before I ever asked her to. She helped me cook, joined me for tea, told me she wanted a marriage as strong as ours. I smiled when she said that, because back then, I still believed mine was unbreakable. Adrian called her sunshine. I thought it was sweet. Now, I know it was a confession whispered in plain sight. That week, our house felt like a celebration in slow motion. Every room glowed with laughter and plans. Claire spent her afternoons helping me arrange flowers, practicing her wedding vows with a nervous smile. Adrian teased her gently, calling her his second daughter. It sounded innocent then, even charming. We had dinners together almost every night, the clinking of forks, Noah's jokes, the warmth of candlelight. Sometimes I would look at Adrian and think, this is what peace looks like. He would catch my gaze, wink softly, and I would melt like I had when we first met. Love, I thought, was built on trust, but trust can also be a kind of blindness. There were small moments I should have noticed. The way Adrian lingered when Claire laughed, the softness in his tone when he said her name, the extra care he took setting her plate at the table. Tiny gestures, nothing you could ever call wrong, not until they began to echo too loudly. One night, I watched from the window as Adrian helped Claire carry boxes from her car. She had just come from her parents' house, bringing decorations for the engagement dinner. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. She smiled in gratitude. It was a fleeting moment, but my stomach twisted in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, emotional, overthinking, that Adrian was just being the kind, fatherly man he had always been. Because the truth is, I didn't want to see it. When you love someone for 27 years, you learn to build walls around your doubts. You decorate them with memories, paint them with forgiveness, and call them faith. The night before everything changed, I remember standing by our bedroom window, watching Adrian read by the dim glow of his bedside lamp. His hair had more silver now, his shoulders more tired, but when he looked up and smiled, I felt that same familiar ache of safety. I whispered, "I love you," half out of habit, half out of hope. He looked at me, his eyes soft and unreadable, and said, "I know, Maeve. It was the last night I believed him. It started with something so small I almost missed it. A single note in a familiar song played wrong." That morning, Adrian left earlier than usual. He said he had a client meeting downtown, but his suit jacket was still hanging on the chair, and the scent of his cologne lingered heavier than normal, like he had sprayed it twice. When I asked if he wanted breakfast, he kissed my cheek without meeting my eyes. That was new. Adrian always looked at me when he lied. But this time, he didn't. Later that day, I drove to the florist to finalize the engagement decorations. Claire was already there, standing outside talking on her phone. Her voice was low, soft, but I caught one word: "Sweetheart." She turned when she saw me, startled, then quickly smiled, slipping her phone into her purse. "Just confirming the cake delivery," she said lightly, her cheeks pink. I believed her for a moment, but as we walked into the shop, I noticed the faint scent of Adrian's aftershave clinging to her sweater. Not strong, but enough to make my throat close. All afternoon I told myself stories, that she had borrowed his jacket, that she had hugged him in greeting, that everything still made sense. But somewhere deep inside, the walls of certainty began to tremble. That night, Noah came home late from work. He was glowing, talking about honeymoon plans, about how lucky he was to have found someone like Claire. I smiled, listened, nodded, but my mind wasn't with him. It was trapped in a loop. Claire's flushed face, Adrian's missing gaze, the smell of his cologne. After dinner, Adrian sat at the piano, playing the song he always played when he was content. Claire and Noah danced in the living room, laughing, their movements clumsy but full of youth. Adrian looked at them, eyes shining with something I couldn't name. Pride, maybe, or longing. But when Claire stumbled, Adrian caught her waist. Too fast, too sure. His hands lingered a breath too long before he let go. Something in me turned cold. The next morning, I found one of Adrian's cufflinks missing from his jewelry box. He brushed it off, said it must have fallen somewhere. "I'll check in the car," he said, smiling, but he didn't. Over the next few days, little things began to unravel. Claire stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Maeve. Adrian began taking longer drives, saying he needed space to think. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, now followed him everywhere. One evening, while clearing the table, I found a folded napkin tucked into Adrian's jacket pocket. There was lipstick on it, a shade too light for mine, too fresh to be old. When I asked, he laughed. "The waitress must have dropped it," he said. "You know how careless they are." I smiled back, though I felt something inside me quietly dying. You can't confront a ghost with just a napkin. You need proof, and proof hides where comfort lives. A few nights later, Claire came over to drop off some wedding invitations. She wore a pale pink dress, her hair loose, her perfume filling the room like spring rain. Adrian was in the study, supposedly on a call, but when she arrived, I noticed the sound of his voice fade. Claire stayed only 10 minutes, but when she left, Adrian followed her out to the porch. They spoke in low voices, too far for me to hear, but I watched through the curtain. His hand brushed her shoulder. She looked down. He leaned closer, and when she finally walked away, his expression, that soft, almost guilty smile, told me everything I didn't want to know. I stood there, frozen, clutching the edge of the curtain like a lifeline. The woman I had called daughter, the man I had trusted with every breath. I didn't cry. I just watched them fade into the dark, two silhouettes bound by something I couldn't yet name. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed felt colder on his side, even though he was there. Every turn of his body sounded like betrayal. Every breath he took reminded me how easily people can share air and hide secrets at the same time. I told myself I needed to be wrong, that I was imagining things, twisting coincidences into conspiracies. So the next morning I decided to test it, gently. "Claire called early," I said over breakfast. "She said you left your pen at her place." Adrian froze for half a second, a blink really, then smiled. "Oh, did I? Must have slipped from my pocket when I signed the caterer's form." He said it so smoothly that if I hadn't been watching closely, I'd have missed the tremor in his hand as he reached for his coffee. The man was lying, and the realization hit like quiet thunder. I didn't confront him that day. I didn't shout or accuse. Instead, I waited. Because betrayal, once suspected, doesn't need to be hunted. It reveals itself. By evening, I found what I didn't know I was looking for. A small silver glint beneath the guest room door. Adrian's missing cufflink. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, and stared at the faint trace of powder on its edge. Lavender foundation. Claire's shade. That was the moment my heart split in two. Silently, without sound. And yet, it was only the beginning. The engagement dinner was 2 nights away. Claire stayed over to help with preparations. She said she wanted to surprise Noah with handmade centerpieces. I told her she could use the guest room upstairs. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and called me Mom again, as if she could sense I needed to hear it. That night, laughter filled the house again. Noah and Adrian watched an old football game, shouting and teasing like best friends. Claire hummed softly while arranging flowers. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything was fine, that my fears were just the ghosts of imagination. But ghosts have a way of proving they're real. At midnight, the house went quiet. I couldn't sleep. Something inside me refused to rest. I told myself I was only going to check if the windows were locked, but somehow my feet carried me up the stairs, past Noah's room, past the framed family photos, to the guest room door. Claire's door. A soft light spilled out from underneath. She had fallen asleep with the lamp on. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and Adrian's cologne. My pulse quickened. I pushed the door open just a little. Claire was fast asleep, the blanket half on the floor, her breathing light and peaceful. The innocence on her face almost fooled me. Almost. On the nightstand, I saw Adrian's watch, the same one I gave him for our 20th anniversary, engraved with to Adrian. For every tomorrow we share. My throat went dry. I stepped closer, barely breathing. The watch ticked like a heartbeat, mocking me with its rhythm. Then something caught my eye. A glint of silver against the white pillow. I moved closer and froze. Adrian's cufflink, the one I had found missing a week ago, nestled beneath her pillow like a secret too intimate to hide anywhere else. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, every piece of me unraveling quietly, perfectly, like the seam of an old dress. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, that maybe Noah had borrowed the cufflink, that maybe Adrian had left it there accidentally. But lies don't fit into innocence that neatly. My knees felt weak. I sat down at the edge of the bed, staring at that tiny piece of metal until it blurred through tears I refused to let fall. Every sound in the house suddenly felt too loud. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock downstairs, the faint creak of Adrian turning in bed. I picked up the cufflink and held it in my palm. It was warm, as if it had been resting against skin, his skin and hers. That thought shattered something inside me that words can't touch. When I finally left the room, I carried the cufflink with me like a piece of evidence, a confession made of silver and shame. In the hallway, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the wall, Adrian's hand on my waist, his eyes filled with the same tenderness I had just seen in Claire's face. 27 years reduced to a lie polished bright enough to pass for love. In our bedroom, he was sleeping soundly, the blanket twisted around his legs. His face was calm, peaceful. the face of a man who didn't know he'd already lost everything. I stood there for a long time, watching him breathe. The part of me that had once adored him wanted to shake him awake, to scream, to demand answers. But another part, colder, sharper, whispered, "Not yet. Justice doesn't begin with noise. It begins with silence." So I slipped the cufflink into the drawer beside his watch collection, right where it belonged. I wanted him to notice it missing, to feel that same panic I had felt when I found it. And when he asked, I'd know if he was afraid of losing me or of being caught. The next morning, he smiled at me like nothing had changed. He brewed coffee, hummed that same song he always did when he was happy. He asked if I'd slept well. "I did," I lied. "And you?" "Better than ever," he said and kissed the top of my head. For the first time in 27 years, I could smell another woman on my husband's skin. Lavender. Claire's perfume. When Claire came downstairs later, she looked radiant. She laughed with Noah, called Adrian Mr. D, the nickname she had given him months ago. He laughed too, his eyes catching hers just a second too long. I watched the invisible thread between them stretch and pulse in front of me, and I realized I wasn't crazy. I was right. And that kind of truth doesn't heal. It transforms you. That night, I wrote a note in my journal. Just one line. He's with her. But I will not break. Because women like me, women who've built homes out of trust, don't fall apart in the first storm. We learn to listen to the thunder. And when the thunder comes again, we make sure it hits where it hurts. Morning light spilled through the curtains like nothing had happened. Adrian hummed as he ironed his shirt. Claire and Noah sat at the table laughing over pancakes, the same table where I'd once thought love was unshakable. I smiled. I poured juice. I played my part perfectly, because sometimes pretending is the only way to survive. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work, his lips soft, familiar, false. I stood by the doorway, waving, and whispered to myself, "You're not my husband anymore. You're my suspect." For the first time in 27 years, I felt powerful. That day I started watching everything. Who called him? How long he stayed out? Which shirts came home faintly scented with vanilla and lavender? Each observation became a note, neatly written in the back of my journal. No anger, no tears, just facts. On Tuesday, his phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower. A message appeared. "Can't stop thinking about last night." No name, just a heart emoji. I took a picture of it, quietly deleted the notification, and slid the phone back. Later, he asked if I wanted to join him for dinner with a client. I smiled. "No, love, you go ahead." He smiled back, relieved, and left humming the same song. Half an hour later, I called the restaurant he mentioned. No reservation under his name, none under his company either. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, clutching my phone, watching the minutes crawl until 1:17 a.m. when his car finally pulled into the driveway. He moved carefully, like a man who knew guilt made noise. When he climbed into bed, he smelled like rain and perfume that wasn't mine. I stared at the ceiling, every breath a countdown. The next morning, Claire came early again. She said Noah had gone to pick up documents from his office. She looked radiant, flushed, bright-eyed, like she'd just run from a secret. I noticed the gold chain on her neck. Adrian had one just like it. "This is lovely," I said, brushing it lightly with my fingers. She smiled nervously. "Oh, just something I found in a boutique." Lies, I thought. Come easier to the young. We spent the afternoon baking desserts for the engagement dinner. I watched her hands tremble slightly when I mentioned Adrian's name. She laughed it off, saying she'd spilled batter on her dress. But I saw the truth in her eyes, panic disguised as politeness. That evening I found a receipt in Adrian's coat pocket. A jewelry store, 2 days old, a gold bracelet, custom engraved, "To my light." My name was nowhere on it. I placed the receipt in a small envelope, sealed it, and hid it inside my old recipe book. Justice, I realized, was a slow meal. You had to prepare it carefully, let it simmer until the flavor was undeniable. The next few days were a theater of lies. Adrian held me tighter, kissed me longer, overcompensating like guilty men do. Claire avoided eye contact, busying herself with wedding lists and errands. Noah, sweet, innocent Noah, kept talking about vows and honeymoon plans, while the world around him quietly fell apart. Every time I looked at him, my heart cracked a little more. I wasn't just watching my husband betray me, I was watching my son's future being poisoned from the inside. One evening, Adrian came home with wine and flowers. "For you," he said, smiling, holding out a bouquet of white roses. My favorite. I wanted to throw them away, to scream that I knew everything. Instead, I placed them gently in a vase. "Thank you, darling," I said softly. "They're beautiful." That night, while he showered, I checked his briefcase. Inside was a folder, his company's financials, or so I thought, but tucked between the papers was something else, a signed consent form. My name, my signature, property transfer to a joint account, Adrian Carter and Claire Dawson. I felt the air leave my body. It wasn't just an affair, it was theft. He hadn't just betrayed my heart, he was dismantling my life. When he came out of the bathroom, humming, towel around his neck, I smiled at him like nothing had changed. Because nothing is more dangerous than a woman who knows too much and says nothing. The next morning, I visited our lawyer under the pretext of updating Noah's wedding documents. I asked casually about property and power of attorney. He frowned when he saw my name on a file I'd never signed. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "this transfer was processed last week. Adrian filed it himself. Your signature's here." He turned the document toward me, and there it was. My handwriting, forged perfectly. The room tilted. The air felt heavy, metallic. I kept my voice calm. "Can you make me a copy?" He nodded. I folded the paper neatly into my purse and left before he could see the tremor in my hands. That evening, Adrian greeted me with another kiss, another lie. I looked at him and saw a man I didn't know. Not my husband, not even human. Just a mask built from years of charm and deceit. When he left for another late meeting, I sat in the living room, staring at the flickering candlelight across our wedding photo. For years, I believed love meant forgiveness. Now I knew better. Love means knowing when to stop forgiving. I poured myself a glass of wine, placed the forged paper beside the cufflink, and whispered to the empty room, "Patience, Maeve. Let him think you're blind." Because revenge isn't born from anger, it's born from clarity. Revenge doesn't begin with rage, it begins with awareness. Every word, every gesture, every whisper between them became data. I no longer cried in the shower or stared at old photos. I studied patterns. I memorized movements. I learned how betrayal breathes. Adrian had always underestimated me. He thought my silence was submission, my kindness was weakness. But silence, when chosen carefully, is strategy, and kindness can be the sharpest weapon of all. The next week, I started planting questions in casual conversations, little tests, little traps. "Claire," I said one afternoon, folding napkins for the engagement dinner, "I think I misplaced my pearl bracelet. You haven't seen it, have you?" Her eyes flickered for just a second. "No, I haven't. Why?" "Oh, nothing," I said, smiling. "Adrian mentioned seeing it near the guest room." She dropped a napkin. "Oh, well, maybe he was mistaken." Her voice shook, just slightly, enough to confirm what I already knew. That night, I checked Adrian's study. His drawers were too neat, his files too organized. Order like that doesn't come from honesty. It comes from guilt trying to hide itself behind control. Inside a folder labeled taxes, I found a sealed envelope, a bank statement, 2 names, Adrian Carter and Claire Dawson. Balance, $78,000. Deposits every week, matching dates from his supposed client trips. I sat there staring at the numbers until they blurred. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I took photos of everything, each document, each receipt. Then I placed everything back exactly as I found it. A good liar never suspects a quiet observer. The next day, I followed him. He said he was going to meet a client at a downtown cafe. I parked across the street, sunglasses on, pretending to read a book. He arrived 5 minutes late, holding a bouquet of lilies. And when Claire walked up to him, wearing that same lavender perfume, I didn't look away. They hugged, subtle but too familiar. He brushed her hair behind her ear, leaned close, whispered something that made her smile like a secret. I felt no tears, no panic, just a strange calm. Because once truth becomes visible, pain turns into power. They sat there for an hour, talking, laughing, sharing a dessert. When he reached for the check, she placed her hand over his. Tender, practiced, wrong. I took photos from the car, every gesture, every laugh, every betrayal frozen in proof. That night, when he came home, I met him with a kiss. I told him dinner was ready. I asked about his meeting. He said it went well. He didn't even blink. For the first time, I saw it clearly. How easy lying had become for him. How skillfully he built a world where truth no longer mattered. Later, when he fell asleep, I unlocked his phone using the code he didn't know I knew. Our wedding anniversary. Inside, I found messages that didn't hide behind code names anymore. I miss you. She's starting to suspect. Soon it'll just be us. Each one burned a little less than the last, because every message was a nail in his own coffin. But one stood out. She signed the papers. She won't know until it's done. My stomach dropped. There was no way Claire could have known I hadn't signed them, unless Adrian told her, unless they planned it together. This wasn't just adultery, it was conspiracy. The next morning, I went to the garden early. The roses were blooming, soft and red, like they didn't know they were growing beside deceit. Adrian came out with his coffee, smiling, pretending everything was normal. He wrapped his arm around me, kissed my hair, and whispered, "I love you, Maeve." I smiled back. "I know you do." He didn't hear the second part I whispered under my breath. For now. That afternoon, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Daniel Hayes, an old family friend, and now a detective. He had been at our wedding. He had seen us dance. And now he would see how it ended. We met at a small cafe outside town. I handed him the photos, the forged papers, the bank records. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he said, "Maeve, this isn't just infidelity. This is fraud. You can press charges." I nodded, calm. "Not yet. I want them to see it happen. I want the truth to show itself." He studied me, maybe searching for the woman I used to be. Soft, trusting, forgiving. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone who had learned that revenge can wear pearls and smile sweetly over tea. That evening, I cooked Adrian's favorite meal. I lit candles. I wore the perfume he had bought me years ago, the same one Claire now wore. When he kissed me goodnight, his eyes lingered, confused. "You smell different," he said. "I know," I whispered. "Things change." He smiled faintly, unaware that every candlelight flicker around him was a trap closing in. In the days that followed, I became invisible. Soft voice, polite smile, no questions. And in that quiet invisibility, I learned the most dangerous truth of all. People reveal everything when they think you're not watching. It was Thursday morning when the first knock came. 2 officers, calm faces, cold tone. The kind of visit that makes the world tilt before you even understand why. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes." "We need to talk to you. It's about the property transfer." My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. The room suddenly felt too small, too bright. "What about it?" One of them exchanged a glance with his partner. "The signature on the documents appears to be Inconsistent. We need to confirm it was yours." I stared at the papers they held out. My name, my handwriting, my lie. Except it wasn't mine, and I realized this wasn't just my discovery anymore. The law was already circling him. I invited them in, my voice steady. "Of course, officers, please sit." As they spoke, their words drifted through me like static. They mentioned fraud, false authorization, missing funds, a possible complaint from the financial department of Adrian's firm. He hadn't only forged my name. He'd used it to drain company accounts into that joint one with Claire. And now, someone inside the company had noticed. When they finally left, the walls seemed to hum with silence. I sat alone at the table, the papers still trembling in my hand, and whispered, "It's starting." That evening, Adrian came home early. Too early. He looked anxious, distracted, his shirt untucked, his confidence cracked. "The police came today," I said softly, watching his face. He froze. "What?" "They asked about the transfer papers, said they needed to verify the signatures." His eyes darted left. That tiny twitch guilty men can't hide. Then, just as quickly, his expression smoothed. "Oh, it's just a misunderstanding. I'll take care of it." He poured himself a drink, hands trembling. "Did you tell them anything?" he asked, voice too calm. I smiled. "Only that you handle all the finances. Why would they ask me?" He exhaled in relief, not realizing that with every word, he was building the rope around his own neck. Later that night, while he slept, I met Daniel again. We sat in his car outside my house, the dashboard light painting both our faces pale blue. "I've got confirmation," he said. "Adrian and Claire are under quiet investigation. Fraud, forgery, and now potential money laundering. They've been moving funds between accounts for months." The words didn't shock me anymore. They clarified me. I wasn't just betrayed emotionally or financially. I was married to a criminal. "What happens next?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "That depends on you. If you want to press charges, I'll make sure the arrest is clean. But if you want something else, you'll have to be careful." Something else. Yes, I wanted something else. Not handcuffs. Not yet. I wanted exposure. I wanted him to see the moment everything he built burned to ash and know that I was the one holding the match. The next few days, I played the role perfectly. Smiles, dinners, laughter, routine. I was the same wife he had always known. Maybe softer, maybe sweeter. It's easy to deceive a man who believes he's smarter than you. Meanwhile, Daniel sent me everything. The case file, the bank trail, even surveillance photos. Each page was another nail, another truth. One document showed Adrian had moved nearly $500,000 from our joint investments into Claire's private account. Another showed he had secretly put our home under her name, effective the day after Noah's wedding. My stomach turned. But I didn't flinch. I simply whispered to myself, "He wants to build a future with her. I'll let him. Just not the one he imagines." On Sunday afternoon, we hosted a family brunch. Claire wore white, smiling too wide. Adrian kept his hand on her chair a little too long. Noah, oblivious, was radiant, telling stories, laughing, dreaming. When I looked at him, I knew what I had to do, not just for me, but for him. This couldn't end quietly. It had to end truthfully. That evening, after everyone left, Adrian walked into my study. He looked pale. "There's been a problem," he said. "At work. They're asking about some transfers." "I know," I replied softly. "The police mentioned it." He stared at me. "You didn't say anything, right?" I smiled faintly. "Of course not. I'm your wife, Adrian." He looked at me for a long time, unsure whether to believe me. Then he nodded, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You always were too good for me." He was right, and by the end of the week, everyone would know it. When he left the room, I opened my drawer. Inside were the photos, the messages, the forged signature, the bank files. Every piece lined up like puzzle fragments that finally formed a clear picture. I took a deep breath, placed everything in a folder labeled Truth, and locked it away. That night, I dreamt of quiet water, still and deep, the kind that hides what it knows until it's ready to rise. The next morning, Daniel called. "They're moving," he said. "Adrian and Claire are transferring funds overseas. It'll happen tonight. If you want your moment, it has to be now." "Tonight," I repeated. "Yes, but be careful. Once it starts, there's no undoing it." I looked out the window at the roses swaying in the breeze, the same ones Adrian once helped me plant. Their thorns glistened like tiny blades. "I've been careful my whole life," I said. "Tonight, I'll be honest." That evening, I put on the necklace Adrian had given me on our 10th anniversary. Gold, simple, heavy with memory. I prepared dinner, the table set perfectly, wine glasses catching candlelight. When he walked in, he smiled in relief. "Still waiting for me?" "Always," I said softly. He didn't notice the small recorder hidden inside the flower vase, or the fact that I had already called Daniel, who was parked down the street waiting for the right words to fall from Adrian's mouth. I poured his wine, sat across from him, and let him talk. He spoke about business, stress, Claire, money, every topic circling closer to his undoing. And when he finally said, "She's the only one who truly understands me," I looked him in the eye and said, "I know, and now, so do they." A soft knock echoed at the door. 2 officers stepped inside. "Adrian Carter," one said. "You're under arrest." He turned to me, eyes wide, realization dawning too late. "Maeve, what did you do?" I stood up slowly, calm as glass. "I stopped forgiving you." The officers read him his rights as he stared, stunned, the world he'd built collapsing around him. Claire's name spilled out of his mouth like a curse, not a confession. And as they took him away, I whispered, "Don't worry, she'll join you soon." Because justice, like betrayal, works best in pairs. It was Thursday morning when everything shifted. The knock on my door was steady, almost polite. But the second I opened it, I knew life had just split in two. 2 officers stood there, calm and unreadable, the kind of presence that carries bad news wrapped in formality. "Mrs. Carter," one said, "we need to talk about your signature." His tone was flat, official, but my heartbeat wasn't. I invited them in, still holding my coffee like it could anchor me to the moment. The words came slowly, clear enough to ruin the rest of my life. They were investigating financial transfers from my account, funds linked to Adrian's firm. My name was on every document, my signature, my handwriting, everything that proved I'd been complicit in something I never even knew existed. I told them calmly, "That's not my signature." One of them nodded like he already knew. The other one said quietly, "Then I'm afraid your husband has some explaining to do." When they left, the silence in the house was unbearable. I sat at the table staring at the papers they'd shown me, my name repeated like an accusation. I thought about every morning coffee I'd poured for him, every bill I'd signed without reading, every trust I'd given away too easily. That evening, Adrian came home early, his usual arrogance slightly cracked. He poured a drink before he even spoke. "The company's going through an audit," he said, pretending not to look at me. "They might ask a few questions. Don't say anything until I handle it." I smiled. "Of course." My voice didn't shake. I watched the way he gripped the glass, how his hand trembled when he thought I wasn't looking. He was unraveling, slowly, quietly, beautifully. That night, when he finally fell asleep, I stepped outside, called Daniel, and told him everything. My friend's voice was steady. "Maeve, the money isn't just missing. He's been moving it to a joint account with Claire Dawson." The air left my body. "How much?" "Enough to build a new life," he said. "Enough to destroy yours." I didn't cry. I just said, "Then we build something else, something honest." The next morning, I played my role perfectly. I smiled. I cooked. I listened to Adrian talk about his day as if nothing was falling apart. He still thought he controlled the narrative, still believed I was the woman who looked away from difficult truths. But that woman was gone. At lunch, Claire called. I watched Adrian's face as he answered. His tone softened instantly. He turned slightly away from me, pretending to look for something in his briefcase. "Don't worry. Sunshine," he said softly. "I'll fix it before she knows." I almost laughed. She already knew. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, holding the folder Daniel had given me. Bank records, photos, messages, proof that every smile in my home had been a setup. Adrian's texts with Claire weren't love notes, they were logistics. They were planning the day they would disappear together, with my money, my house, my name. I realized something important in that moment. Betrayal doesn't always want to break you. Sometimes it just wants to replace you. 2 days later, Daniel called again. He's under quiet investigation now. Fraud, forgery, property theft. The police want to see how far it goes before they make a move. "Good," I said. "I want him to think he's safe." That Sunday, we hosted brunch. Claire came early, glowing like sin disguised as innocence. Adrian played his role perfectly, too, smiling, charming, reaching for her hand every time Noah turned his head. Watching them together felt like staring at a painting of my own funeral. When everyone left, Adrian came into the kitchen, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're quiet today." I smiled softly. "Just tired." He poured himself another drink. "You worry too much, Maeve. You always have." I watched him lift the glass and thought, not anymore. That night, I met Daniel again. We sat in his car near the park, quiet, waiting for the pieces to fit. "They're transferring the money tonight," he said. "If you want to end this, we can make the call." I nodded slowly. "No, not yet. He'll know it was me. I want him to confess first." "How?" Daniel asked. "Over dinner." I prepared the table that evening like it was a ceremony. Candlelight, his favorite meal, a bottle of wine older than our son. Every detail perfect, every movement practiced. When he arrived, he looked relieved. "You've been distant lately," he said, sitting down. "I was starting to think you didn't love me anymore." I smiled. "Oh, I do, Adrian. I just love you differently now." He laughed softly, not hearing the truth in my tone. I poured the wine, handed him his glass, and waited. He started talking, filling the air with meaningless noise about work, clients, numbers, the same performance I'd heard for years. Then, halfway through his drink, he sighed, leaned back, and said it, the line that sealed his fate. "She understands me better than anyone ever did." I met his eyes, calm, steady. "Good," I said. "Then she can understand what happens next." There was a knock at the door. 2 officers stepped inside, followed by Daniel. "Adrian Carter," the officer said. "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and theft." Adrian's face drained of color. He turned toward me, confusion giving way to horror. "Maeve, what did you do?" I rose slowly, my voice soft but sharp. "I stopped protecting you." As they cuffed him, he started shouting Claire's name, swearing she'd fix it. But even she couldn't fix what was already done. The evidence was airtight, every trail leading straight to both of them. When they walked him out, the room felt lighter. Not peaceful, just honest. Before he stepped outside, I said one last thing. "Don't worry, Adrian. You won't be lonely where you're going. Claire will be right behind you." He looked back at me, eyes wide. Broken, furious, and I smiled, the way only a woman who's finally free can smile. The night Adrian was taken away, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It was too quiet, too hollow, like every wall was waiting for someone to explain what just happened. Noah came home 2 hours later, confused by the police cars still parked outside. He rushed in, his voice shaking. "Mom, what's going on? Why were they here? Where's Dad?" I tried to steady my voice. "He's gone, Noah." "What do you mean, gone?" "He's been arrested." His face twisted, searching for something to hold on to. Arrested for what? I hesitated, then said it softly. Fraud, forgery, theft. And there's more, son. There's a woman involved. The color drained from his face. He sank onto the couch, staring at nothing. Who? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He saw it in my eyes before I said her name. Claire. The sound of it broke something in the air. He laughed once, bitterly, like a man realizing the joke was always on him. You're lying. I wish I was. He stood up, pacing, shaking his head. No, she wouldn't. Not her. We were getting married, Mom. I know, I whispered, my throat tightening. That's what makes it hurt the most. He punched the wall, tears sliding down his face, his voice cracking between rage and disbelief. You knew. How long have you known? A while. And you didn't tell me? I needed proof. He turned away, breathing hard. You should have let me confront him. You should have let me handle it. No, Noah, I said gently. You shouldn't have had to. The silence that followed was brutal, the kind of silence that fills every room, every heartbeat. Every inch of love left between a mother and her son. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, broken. What happens now? Now, I said quietly, we rebuild, without them. He nodded slowly, but his eyes were empty. That night, he packed a bag and left to stay at a friend's house. I didn't stop him. Some pain needs space to breathe. For the first time in 27 years, I slept alone without guilt, fear, or expectation. Just emptiness. Pure, honest emptiness. The next morning, the sun rose like nothing had happened. Birds sang, neighbors waved, life went on, and I realized the world doesn't stop for heartbreak. It just watches quietly while you learn to walk again. In the days that followed, reporters called. Headlines appeared. Local businessmen charged with fraud and infidelity scandal. Pictures of Adrian and Claire at company events filled the news. The world finally saw what I had lived through in silence. Daniel came by once to check on me. He stood at the door, holding a folder. You did the right thing, Maeve. Then why does it feel so wrong? I asked. Because you still loved him, he said softly. And love doesn't turn off when the truth turns on. I nodded, tears finally spilling, quiet and uninvited. For years I had imagined justice as peace, but now I knew better. Justice is heavy. It doesn't heal you, it empties you. That night I walked through the house, touching everything that had been ours. The piano he used to play, the photos on the wall, the ring box hidden in the drawer. I opened it and stared at the wedding band he'd left behind, dull and cold, just metal now. I placed it on the counter, next to a single white rose. This is where you stay, I whispered. This is where the story ends for you. When Noah finally came home 3 days later, he looked older, quieter. He didn't speak at first, just walked up, hugged me tight and said, I believe you. That was the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. We sat together for hours, no words, just the sound of two people trying to rebuild from ashes. I told him everything. How I found the cufflink, how I followed Adrian, how I waited for proof. He listened without interrupting, eyes full of sorrow and admiration. When I finished, he said softly, You saved us. No, I said. I just stopped pretending. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There were lines I hadn't noticed before. A stillness in my eyes that wasn't weakness. It was survival. For the first time, I didn't see a wife or a victim. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out cleaner than before. And that realization, that was the beginning of freedom. 3 weeks after the arrest, I stopped flinching at the sound of my own doorbell. The house was quiet again, not empty, just mine. For the first time, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like ownership. Adrian was in custody, waiting for trial. Claire was under investigation for conspiracy and financial collaboration. Every morning the news mentioned their names, and every time I felt the strange mix of pain and relief that comes with finally being seen. For 27 years, I had lived in the background of my own life. Now, the spotlight that once burned me was lighting up the truth. Daniel handled most of the legal details, but there was one part I refused to delegate: the story itself. For years, Adrian had controlled the narrative. He built the perfect family portrait, the perfect career, the perfect lie. I was done being edited out. So I called a reporter. Her name was Elise Moore, the same journalist who had once interviewed Adrian for a charity gala. When she arrived, I didn't dress like a victim. I wore black, confident, calm, deliberate. She looked at me and said quietly, "Mrs. Carter, I didn't expect you to talk. Most wives don't." "I'm not most wives," I said. For 2 hours, I told her everything: the betrayal, the forgery, the secret accounts, the fiancé. She listened in stunned silence, her pen barely moving. When I finished, she asked, "Why now? Why speak publicly?" "Because silence made him powerful," I said. "Truth will make him small." The article went live 2 days later. The Double Life of Adrian Carter: How a Perfect Marriage Hid a Perfect Crime. It spread like wildfire. People shared it, dissected it, turned it into podcasts and discussion panels. But the part that went most viral wasn't about the fraud. It was one line Elise had quoted from me. "He didn't just lie to me. He trained me to stay quiet about it. I'm done being quiet." That sentence became a movement. Women started sending messages, strangers thanking me for giving voice to the things they couldn't say out loud. Some were angry, some broken, some free. And for the first time, I felt that maybe all the pain had a purpose. The following week, Daniel brought documents showing the court had approved asset freezes. Every property Adrian had under both his name and Claire's was officially under investigation. The company's board fired him unanimously. His name was stripped from every plaque, every portfolio, every project he ever claimed to build. But justice still felt incomplete. Because I knew he would survive this, prison or not, he'd always see himself as the victim of circumstance. He'd twist the story, blame everyone else, play innocent in his own head. Men like Adrian never accept guilt. They rewrite it. So I decided to finish the story in a way he couldn't rewrite. I started a foundation, the Verity Project, to help women uncover financial manipulation in marriages. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redirection. The same intelligence I used to expose Adrian, I now use to protect others. Every case we opened was a mirror of my past, and every woman we helped was another version of me walking out of the dark. The foundation caught fire online. Donations came in from everywhere. Elise covered it again. From betrayal to battle, the woman who turned her pain into power. The comment section filled with people calling me fearless, brilliant, inspiring. I wasn't any of those things. I was just awake. One morning, I got a letter from Adrian's lawyer. He wanted to meet. "He has something to say," the letter read. For a moment, I almost ignored it. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, especially when it's tied to closure. So, I went. The meeting took place in a small room at the county facility. Adrian looked older, thinner, grayer, still trying to find the charm that used to open every door. He tried to smile. "You look good, Maeve." "I am good," I said evenly. "What do you want?" He hesitated. "I just wanted to tell you I never meant to hurt you. Things got complicated." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Complicated? You forged my name, stole our savings, slept with our son's fiancée, and destroyed your own family. That's not complicated. That's calculated." He lowered his gaze. "I lost everything." "No," I said quietly. "You lost everything that wasn't yours." For a moment there was silence. Not awkward, just final. He looked up again, searching my face for something that wasn't there anymore. "You were always the strong one," he whispered. "I just never saw it." I stood, gathering my coat. "That's because you were too busy looking at yourself. When I left the room, I didn't look back, because you can't stare at what you've already buried." Outside, Daniel was waiting by the car. "How did it go?" he asked. I smiled faintly. He's still trying to convince himself he's a victim. Daniel nodded. They always do. In the months that followed, the foundation grew faster than I imagined. I started speaking at conferences, sharing the details of my story, not as gossip, but as warning. Every time I said the words, "I found his cufflink under her pillow," the room went silent. It wasn't shock, it was recognition. Because betrayal wears many faces, but it always feels the same when you find it in your bed. Eventually, Noah came to one of my talks. He sat quietly in the front row, eyes wet but proud. Afterward, he hugged me and said, "Dad's story ended in shame, but yours didn't. You made it mean something." And that was it. The closure I didn't know I was still searching for. I walked off stage that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from owning your truth so completely that no one can twist it again. Adrian will serve his time. Claire will too. But that's not the victory. The victory is that I don't flinch when I say my own name anymore. For 27 years, I lived as Mrs. Adrian Carter. Now, I live as Maeve. And that, finally, is enough. 5 months passed before I realized I hadn't thought about him in an entire day. No memory, no ache, no invisible weight on my chest. Just space, empty, peaceful space. That's when I understood healing doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It creeps in quietly, one breath at a time, until you look around and notice the storm's already gone. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. The rooms that once held whispers and lies were now full of music, light, and the steady rhythm of new beginnings. I painted the living room, changed the curtains, sold the dining table where the last dinner of my marriage happened. I didn't keep the ghosts. I kept the lessons. Noah moved back home for a while. He was different now. Quieter, more thoughtful. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window, lost in memories he didn't want to keep. One night, over dinner, he said, "I still don't understand how you managed to stay so calm." I smiled softly. "Because rage burns too fast, Noah. If you let it run wild, it turns you into them. Calm is what lets you win." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about it, then answered honestly, "I miss the man I thought he was, but I don't miss the truth." We talked for hours that night, not about betrayal, not about Claire, but about what comes after heartbreak. He told me he'd started volunteering with the Verity Project, helping other victims navigate their own stories. I looked at him and realized something beautiful. The pain hadn't just changed me, it had changed him too. It had made both of us stronger, softer, wiser. The next morning, I visited the garden for the first time since winter ended. The roses were blooming again, richer and deeper in color than I'd ever seen them. For a moment, I just stood there, watching how easily beauty returns after destruction, how quietly it forgives the ground that once held rot. I whispered, "We made it." And for the first time, I truly meant it. A week later, Elise called. "Maeve, the documentary series wants to feature your story. They said it's not just about what happened, it's about what you did after." I hesitated. I'd spent so long trying to escape the spotlight, but maybe it was time to let the story live somewhere other than inside me. "All right," I said, "but this time I tell it my way." When filming began, they asked me to start from the beginning, How I met Adrian, how I found out, how it all fell apart. But when the cameras rolled, I didn't start with pain. I started with truth. I loved a man who lied, I said, voice steady. And when the lies fell apart, I learned that survival isn't about staying untouched. It's about staying kind. Because even when they take your trust, they can't take your integrity, not unless you give it to them. The producer's eyes watered. The crew went silent. And I realized that maybe the story was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. After the shoot, I walked outside into the soft evening air. The world looked different, lighter somehow. The air carried no bitterness, only freedom. Daniel met me there, leaning against his car, watching me with that quiet understanding that doesn't need words. "It's over," he said. I smiled. "No, it's begun." We sat there for a while, saying nothing. Just two people who had seen too much, both learning that peace doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it just comes when you stop waiting for them. That night, before bed, I opened my journal for the first time since the arrest. The last line I had written months ago said, "Justice is loud, healing is quiet." So I added one more beneath it, and both are necessary. The next morning, I hosted a small dinner. Not a celebration, just a gathering. Close friends, women from the foundation, a few new faces who understood pain like I did. As dessert was served, chocolate mousse, sweet but not too sweet, I smiled to myself. "Funny," I said, laughing softly. "I used to think revenge would taste bitter. Turns out it tastes a little like this." Everyone laughed, the kind of laughter that carries survival in it, the kind that means you made it through. When the evening ended and the guests left, I stood by the door for a moment, watching the last candle flicker out. There was no fear in me anymore, no shadows behind the walls, just peace. Before I turned off the lights, I whispered to the quiet house, "Thank you for holding me while I broke and for letting me rebuild." Then I smiled and walked upstairs, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as Maeve Carter, the woman who finally came home to herself. It's been 5 years. 5 years since the night my husband was led away in handcuffs. 5 years since my son's heart shattered in front of me. 5 years since I found a cufflink under a pillow that wasn't mine and thought my life had ended. But endings are tricky things. They often disguise themselves as beginnings. Today, my life looks nothing like it did back then. The Verity Project has grown into something I could never have imagined. Chapters in 8 cities. Thousands of women who no longer whisper when they talk about betrayal, who no longer hide behind shame or fear. We meet, we talk, we rebuild. And in every face I see the same truth. Pain doesn't destroy us. Silence does. Noah is married now, to a woman who looks at him the way I once wished someone would look at me. He still carries scars from that time, but he carries them with pride. Scars mean you survived. As for Adrian, he'll be out soon. The system is merciful like that. I don't think about him much anymore. I used to rehearse what I'd say if I ever saw him again, but now I know. There's nothing left to say. His chapter ended in a courtroom. Mine began in the mirror. Sometimes I visit the garden in the early morning, when the roses are still wet with dew. I watch them open slowly, reaching for the light without apology. That's how I want to live, unashamed, unfolding, reaching forward. People still ask if I've forgiven him. The answer changes every time. Some days I have, some days I haven't, but all days I've moved on. And maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not erasing what happened, but refusing to let it keep happening inside you. Last month, I was invited to speak at a women's conference. They introduced me as the woman who turned betrayal into purpose. I stood there under the lights, smiled, and said, "No, I'm just someone who stopped apologizing for surviving." Afterward, I served dessert. Chocolate mousse, the same recipe from that night. Everyone laughed when I told them why. I said, Because sometimes revenge doesn't have to taste bitter. Sometimes it can taste like peace. Now, as I sit here recording this, I want to tell you something. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever been broken by the ones you built your life around, this story is for you. Because pain is not where your story ends. It's just where it begins to mean something. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And if you've ever found your strength hiding behind heartbreak, don't forget to share this story. Someone out there needs to know that dessert can be sweet, even after the fire. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe.